Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Monsters and Myths. Today, we're taking a look at the werewolf. In folklore, a werewolf, or occasionally lycanthrope, is a human with the ability to shape-shift into a wolf, either purposely or after being placed under a curse or affliction, often a bite or a scratch from another werewolf, with the transformations occurring on the night of a full moon. The werewolf is a widespread concept in European folklore, existing in many variants. Beliefs in werewolves developed in parallel to the belief in witches in the course of the late Middle Ages and the early modern period. Like the witchcraft trials, the trial of supposed werewolves emerged in what is now Switzerland in the early 15th century and spread throughout Europe in the 16th, peaking in the 17th and subsiding by the 18th century. The term lycanthropy, referring both to the ability to transform oneself into a wolf and to the act of so doing, comes from ancient Greek. The word does occur in ancient Greek sources, but only in late antiquity, and rarely. The concept of the werewolf in Western and Northern Europe is strongly influenced by the role of the wolf in Germanic paganism. Such transformations of men into wolves in pagan cult were associated with the devil from the early medieval perspective. In classical antiquity, in the 2nd century BC, the Greek geographer Pausanias related the story of King Lycian of Arcadia, who was transformed into a wolf because he had sacrificed a child in the altar of Zeus. In this version of the legend, told by Ovid in his Metamorphoses, when Zeus visits Lycian disguised as a common man, Lycian wants to test if he is really a god. To that end, he kills a Milesian hostage and serves his entrails to Zeus. Disgusted, the god turns Lycian into a wolf. Pliny the Elder likewise recounts another tale of lycanthropy. He mentions that in Arcadia, once a year a man was chosen by lot from the Anthus clan. The chosen man was escorted into a marsh in the area, where he hung his clothes into an oak tree, swam across the marsh and transformed into a wolf, joining a pack for 9 years. If during these 9 years he refrained from tasting human flesh, he returned to the same marsh, swam back and recovered his previous human form, with 9 years added to his appearance. Early Christian authors also mentioned werewolves. In The City of God, Augustine of Hippo gives the account similar to that found in Pliny the Elder. Augustine explains that it is very generally believed that by certain witches' spells, men may be turned into wolves. There is evidence of widespread belief in werewolves in medieval Europe. This evidence spans much of the continent, as well as the British Isles. The Germanic pagan traditions associated with wolfmen persisted longest in the Scandinavian Viking Age. Viking warriors were resistant to pain and killed viciously in battle, much like wild animals. The berserkers are closely associated with the Norse god Odin, and these Scandinavian traditions may have spread, giving rise to the Slavic werewolf tales. Until the 20th century, wolf attacks on humans were an occasional but still widespread feature of life in Europe. Some scholars have suggested that it was inevitable that wolves, being the most feared predators in Europe, were projected into the folklore of evil shapeshifters. This is said to be corroborated by the fact that areas devoid of wolves typically use different kinds of predator to fill the niche. In Asian culture, for example, the were equivalent is a were tiger or a were leopard. Some modern researchers have tried to explain the reports of werewolf behavior with recognized medical conditions. Dr. Lee Illis of Guy's Hospital in London wrote a paper in 1963 in which he argues that historical accounts on werewolves could have, in fact, been referring to victims of congenital porphyria, stating how the symptoms of photosensitivity, reddish teeth, and psychosis could have been grounds for accusing a sufferer of being a werewolf. In folklore, werewolves are said to bear telltale physical traits even in their human form. These include the meeting of both eyebrows at the bridge of the nose, curved fingernails, low set ears, and a swinging stride. One method of identifying a werewolf in its human form was to cut the flesh of the accused under the pretense that fur would be seen within the wound. After returning to their human forms, werewolves are usually documented as becoming weak, debilitated, and undergoing painful nervous depression. One universally reviled trait in medieval Europe was the werewolf's habit of devouring recently buried corpses, a trait that is documented extensively. Various methods have existed for removing the curse of the werewolf. In antiquity, the ancient Greeks and Romans believed in the power of exhaustion in curing people of lycanthropy. The victim would be subjected to long periods of physical activity in the hope of being purged of the malady. In medieval Europe, traditionally there are three methods one can use to cure a victim of lycanthropy: surgically, or by exorcism, or medicinally, usually by the use of wolfsbane. Historically, the use of silver weapons is a feature that appears in German folklore of the 19th century. English folklore, prior to 1865, showed shapeshifters to be vulnerable to silver. In the year 1640, the city of Greifswald, Germany, was infested by werewolves. A clever lad suggested that they gather all their silver buttons, goblets, belt buckles, and so forth, and melt them down into bullets for their muskets and pistols. This time they slaughtered the creatures and rid Greifswald of the lycanthropes. In the 1897 novel Dracula and the short story Dracula's Guest, both written by Bram Stoker, he drew on earlier mythologies of werewolves and similar legendary demons. It is mentioned that Dracula can shapeshift into a wolf at night, but is unable to do so during the day. At Monsters and Myths, we'll be covering the legend of the vampire in a future episode, so more on that later. Hollywood has adapted the legend of the werewolf into a legitimate pop culture phenomenon. Werewolves can be seen in major motion pictures, novels, comic books, and video games. The first film to use an anthropomorphic werewolf was The Werewolf of London in 1935, closely followed by the Universal Studios' The Wolfman, 1941. Sympathetic portrayals are few, such as the comedic but tortured protagonist David in An American Werewolf in London. The first movie to feature the transformative effect of the full moon was Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman in 1943. The werewolf is a staple of children's folklore. Little Red Riding Hood is a European fairy tale about a young girl and a big bad wolf. Its origins can be traced back to the 10th century to several European folk tales, including one from Italy called The False Grandmother. The story displays many similarities to stories from classical Greece and Rome. The general theme of the werewolf is also reflected in the Russian tale Peter and the Wolf, and the grim tale The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids. Latter-day versions of these stories are notably tamer than the older stories, which contained much darker themes. From the legends of the classical period to medieval times, up to the present day, the werewolf retains a dark corner, hidden somewhere in the forest of our imaginations. Thanks for watching the video. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe and leave your comments below. Take care and take it easy.